So when I
Mm.
work with parents, I think, hopeful or pre-adoptive parents, adoptive parents, get some parenting guidance, even if it just means like reviewing with yourself or with your partner, what are your parenting goals and strategies and perspectives? Because first of all, if it's two caregivers, how do you all get in on a coalition? But however it is, how do you interrogate and review your parenting template so that you can provide what an adoptee needs? And we can ask this question: do adoptees and biological children, could we parent them the same? Well, listeners can kind of think about that themselves. What I'm saying is that the parent guidance idea is, um, we're asking, how do you make space for children, and even in your own mind, to ask, to be curious about, I wonder if what I'm seeing right now with this behavior, this interaction, this interpersonal dynamic right now has anything to do with physiological responses to trauma, um, distorted or disrupted development of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, trauma, grief, loss, identity, shame, guilt. I wonder, all right, maybe it's not just about, I don't want to go to school today and I'm being a defiant, spoiled, ungrateful, entitled brat. Maybe there's more to this story.
Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Greenspan, a single mom through adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome Cam Lee Small, a Korean-American transracial adoptee, licensed clinical counselor, author, and TEDx speaker. Cam is dedicated to promoting adoption literacy across the U.S. and beyond, helping adoptees, adoptive families, and professionals better understand the lifelong impact of adoption. Through his counseling practice, speaking engagements, and his book called The Adoptee's Journey from Loss and Trauma to Healing and Empowerment, Cam shares valuable insights on identity, loss, and healing. His personal and professional experiences provide him with a unique perspective on the complexities of adoption and highlight the importance of lifelong support for adoptees. When he's not working with families or sharing his message on big platforms, Cam is probably listening to Rage Against the Machine or one of his other favorite artists, which serves as an outlet for reflection and self-expression. Join us today as we explore Cam's incredible journey and discuss how we can all contribute to a more informed and compassionate adoption community. Welcome, Cam. I'm so excited to have you on today. You have been blowing up with your TEDx, and I just want to jump right in, if that's okay with you. And I want to
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I want to jump in with something that really moved me as I was doing my research before you came on. I would love for you to start by reading your letter to future adoptive parents.
Dear Mom and Dad, you'll arrive tomorrow at the airport. You're so excited. You've been waiting for this moment for so long. It means so many things for you as you take this significant step in the process of adopting. Your life is about to change forever. I fell asleep tonight for the last time in my mom's arms. I don't know that, though. In fact, there's so much I don't know. Right now, I'm tucked in, cozy. Tomorrow, I'll be torn apart, terrified. Part of me will remain here as if she holds me in her heart permanently. Another will be taken to the airport as if nothing really is permanent. You'll hold me in your arms as I scream for her. I'll hold her in my imagination. I'll do everything in my power to get back to my mom, my home, my country. But I'm only a toddler, and my life is about to change forever. I'll thank you genuinely, but you won't hear it for at least 30 years. I'll love you then, but only after discovering the love that knew me even before my first day. Can you wait that long? Tomorrow will be our first day together and our first day apart. Thank you in advance for your patience.
What inspired you to write this?
There was an invitation from a fellow adoptee advocate, activist, and her name is Hannah Jackson Matthews. And it was part of a project that she was working on. And this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And it was really a way for me to continue processing my own story, as well as invite viewers, listeners, anyone who would engage with this, invite them into a heightened layer of empathy for the adoptee experience. And I know that, there's a saying, if you've met one adoptee, you've met one adoptee. Okay. So my story is not everyone's story. And yet there's something about putting that perspective out there that I would hope, could resonate with folks who are interested in considering different perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, such powerful words. I'm curious. First of all, how long ago did you write that? Like, where were you in your journey?
Right. So this was, I think, maybe in 2018. And I've been doing adoptee activism, volunteering, um, even informal types of counseling since like 2008. But for me, in 2018, this was I earned my master's in counseling psychology in 2015, and then I was on the process for on the pathway to licensure, and I just launched my private practice, Therapy
Mhm.
Redeemed, and I was very interested in how adoptee activists were leveraging social media and just the ability to reach many people, especially adoptees, even to read a blog post to say, wow, that's me. I see myself
Yeah.
represented in this essay that someone wrote. So I had already been in reunion. I've gone through the process of searching,
Okay.
working with Eastern Child Welfare Services, traveling to Korea, all of that. And yet there I was I was learning firsthand that reunion isn't a one size fits all solution to the complexities of adoption, and I was still holding a lot of questions and a lot of grief. And as a mental health professional, I know that part of that work includes self reflection and then community engagement, the witness aspect,
Hmm.
where when our stories are witnessed by others, that's part of the healing process. When others can say, I see you, I hear that, that makes
Yeah.
sense to me, rather than what do you have to be sad about? So that's where I was in that process, and helping, walking alongside other adult adoptees, adoptive families, and really, leaning into this work of adoptee consciousness, um, adoption advocacy, adoption literacy.
Have you always been a great writer like that? It was so, I mean, so poetic.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. I think for me, it's just the process of like connecting with others in the
Yeah.
community to say, yo, we're putting our hearts out here, and not that we owe it to
Totally.
people, and not that we're, are needing some kind of like brilliant affirmation, but to say, is anyone else feeling this way? Am I the only one who's ever thought about this? And I think the blessing curse of internet is you can put your stuff out there, but the strength of this digital age is that someone in Australia can read this and be like,
Hmm.
whoa, well, thank you for that. I didn't know there was a word for that kind of grief.
Yeah.
And I'm just so, yeah, thank you for that. And then that allows them to share a little bit more of their story.
Yeah. I'm imagining it wasn't super easy to write. Um, but thank you for writing it and being so vulnerable and doing so. You mentioned that this was after your reunification with your birth family. So your birth mom is still
Hmm.
in Korea, or
Correct.
was when
Hmm.
you reunited with her. That must have been a pretty profound experience. What I'm curious what you knew about her previously, if anything, and how long prior to actually finding her had you had this desire for reunification? Was it
Hmm.
always from when you were a little kid? Did you hang on to that? Or was that a newer thing as you were creeping into your adult years?
A lot of the listeners know this idea of, trauma freezes our bodies in the past. So I think about like maybe cognitively,
Hmm.
I I didn't have words to say something like I miss my mom. I miss Korea. I'm sad about being separated. And I grew up with my Korean mother and father in Busan for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then after my dad died, that's when my mom was sort of approached by these professionals and people in the community. And that ultimately led her to make this decision for relinquishment, because her belief was that the best thing for Hisong would be international adoption. So I spent 6 months in foster care, and I was placed at 3.5 years old. So I didn't have language. I didn't have English language. I was speaking Korean. And I think there's like I said, the cognitive piece in my mind, it wasn't formed yet, but that visceral, the like, oh my goodness, what is happening to me? I,
Mm-hmm.
I was just in Korea last night eating this food, surrounded by the sensory experiences. Now, why am I on this train to an airport? I don't know what an airport is. Why am I on this big, huge machine, airplane thing? It's loud. And why are they giving me to these strangers? Oma, where are you? Right. So that's in the body. And throughout my life, I think I really struggled to put my finger on it. Like I knew something's off, but I didn't have the mental health support. No fault to my parents or folks around me. I didn't have the mental health support to help me explore that, express that, and learn how to negotiate and manage those normal responses to abnormal situations. So in Korea, I mean, growing up, I had my intake documents that my parents let me look at whenever I wanted to. And there was some information about my mother in there. And then it was the fill in the blanks. And again, no fault to my parents, but they were sort of like leaning into what the intake document said, that maybe she was going through some kind of hardship, financial hardship, emotional hardship that prevented her from being able to parent me somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if I would have grown up there, maybe my situation could have gotten worse. So that's kind of the ideas in my mind. And then, yeah, as a child, as a teen, you kind of fill in the blanks. And it's not like my parents were checking in on me about, hey, let's give you space to kind of think about this a little bit more, or introducing me to other adoptees. It was in the 80s in the middle of Wisconsin. So the interest came when I was approached by a Korean American pastor, and he invited me to his church plant in Madison, Wisconsin, and then being sort of introduced to a larger Asian American community for the first time ever. There was an identity sort of reckoning of like, who am I? Who are these people in relationship? What does it mean to be Asian American? And
Mm-hmm.
then in that church, I was introduced to a couple of adoptees there who invited me to serve as a camp counselor. So through that whole season, I started hearing reunion stories of campers, other adult adoptees, as I was volunteering at different events, and one adoptee that I worked with, especially, shared his story with me. And really, for me, I was like, why would you want to search? I didn't know that you could search. And really thought provoking questions and dialogue that he had with me. And all of that culminated into, I think I'm ready. I'm going to contact my adoption agency. And um, it seemed random, but a woman came in to a place that I was working at and learned that I was adopted and said, "Hey, I've got some information. If you're ever interested in searching for birth family, here you go." And that was she was part of a string of very important meetings, I would say, through that season that helped me. So it was about 4 or 5 years till I heard back from the adoption agency. We
Oh, wow.
located someone who was a candidate, um, and sort of pushed the process forward that way. So meeting my mom, I didn't have much information besides the intake documents and my assumptions.
Okay.
And then in that meeting, there were challenged assumptions. Like, this is a person, a multi-dimensional person with her own lived experience. And, we can talk more about that, but just being able to hear her story from her point of view right there in person in front of her, and ask questions back and forth, was a real gift to me. And I'm very thankful for that. I wish there could be more. I'm hoping there could be more. We're in a holding pattern as we speak. And that's the thing about ambiguous loss, is that yes, we reunited, but even, I mean, as we're talking right now, I don't know her whereabouts. I don't
Mm.
know who would contact me if anything happened to her, illness, harm, death. That's part of the ambiguity of it. But being able to meet her and hear just more of her story fleshed out, that made a difference for me. Also, more questions, but that's kind of what led me into the counseling space. Are there other
Oh,
adoptees going through this kind of stuff? And how can I help
yeah.
be a part of that?
Wow. There's so much there. So going back, before you met these, the people that started sharing stories and asking you about reunion, had you thought you wanted to, but just didn't think you could? Or had the thought really not even entered your mind until it slapped you in the face like that?
I think, yeah, as I think back, the the thought never really entered my mind, officially or formally or in a significant way, that you can search for these people that were a part of your life before you were adopted, or that you would want to, that they're worth searching for. I came up with this assumption that Korea was better off without me, and I was better off without Korea. That's sort of like what I internalized. And I can't pinpoint to any one person or a season of that, but it's just a culmination of being placed from Korea into the US, growing up in a predominantly white space, small
Yeah.
town, just internalizing Korea didn't want me, and I don't want Korea because look at them,
So
and
that was a
all of
story
those
you told
assumptions.
yourself, whether or not you pushed your true feelings down, which it sounds like maybe you did, because as soon as you were given the opportunity, you jumped, right?
Right? So it's almost protective in a way
Yeah.
to have that narrative and say, okay, that makes sense to me. That
Okay.
resolves this sort of burning question, why am I even here? Well, it's because they don't want you for whatever reason, or they couldn't have you, and they don't really have any value here. It's not like
Mhm.
Korean culture or Asian culture is celebrated where I was from. So just makes sense, right? Do the math. Until, like you said, later on, I start becoming exposed to other elements of the
Yeah.
story. Is there more to the story? Well, there is.
So when you finally did go to Korea, first of all, did your parents support that or go with you, or where were they in the
They,
process?
yeah, their support. I so appreciated the way that they supported. They gave me access to even more information, like case number files, all of that, and they they supported financially. I think they would have maybe found a way to come with me if I wanted to, but for me, I was in a season where I felt the need to do that solo. I
Got it.
was like in my late 20s, and I had a few connections over there already. One of my best friends with teaching English there,
Oh,
and
that's
it was
nice.
a journey that I just needed to take myself in my own time, my own pace.
Yeah.
So they supported that, and they didn't ask questions. They didn't push back. It was for them almost like an unspoken, of course. Why did it
Yeah.
take so long?
Beautiful. And when you met with her, did you need an interpreter or were you able to communicate directly?
I did need an interpreter. So I had learned, I was taking Korean language on campus. I'd taken 3 semesters just to have
Mm-hmm.
some basic stuff. And around the time that the person from the that helped me do the search that came in, that woman I spoke of, another person came in a few weeks later and offered to teach me Korean language for free at the Barnes and Noble next door. It
Wow.
was just, it felt really random, but very timely. And I just believe in that kind of provision. So I had a friend there teaching English, and I was like, "Hey, man, I think I found my birth mom. Can I stay with you for a few weeks over winter break between semesters?" He's like, "Yeah, of course, for sure." And then I knew some people that were there who I had met at some of the adoptee camps that I was serving at prior to to the season. So one of those people, a few of those people interpreted for me. And I had a friend on campus who happened to be in Korea also during winter break. And so they, 2 people that interpreted during several of our meetings during those 3 weeks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How do you think that shaped your sense of belonging?
Belonging is a very fluid term.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me as a Korean adoptee, in my experience going to Korea and for that first time, not having fluency of Korean language or Korean culture, I had elements of feeling like an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
I don't belong here. People are interrogating why I don't speak Korean. I get funny looks and I just feel out of place. This isn't my home. At the same time, I'm finally back in the place where I was born. These are my people. I can blend in to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I was, quote unquote, supposed to grow up. This is not like everything that I've seen represented in the news or TV shows or movies, media growing up. I'm getting the depth and the breadth of Korean culture, the vibrant sensory experience, the smells, the tastes, the sounds, the people, nice people, kind people, like my people. So it was a both and mixture that that kind of shapes my understanding of what it means to belong. And there's a both and, there's a duality, and there's sort of like this continual tension of belonging and non-belonging. And there are some scholars that have different terms for it, um, but that's how I would put it. It's like sort of this tension between belonging and non-belonging, just continually being worked out. And every time I go back to Korea, I've been back a handful of times. I think that sense of ownership becomes stronger for me because of this sort of like internal resistance to, I'm not going to let other people keep me from embracing my origins. And what I mean by that is like this external, okay, a person at the restaurant gave me a funny look because I speak English. Well, I'm not letting them dictate for me whether or not I belong here.
Yeah.
That might be more about them and their limited understanding of the world,
Mm-hmm.
history, trauma, adoption, grief, all of that. I'm here and I'm soaking in this experience on my own terms. So I'm sort of like taking ownership for that. And in that regard, belonging is something that I can both receive, but I can also participate in, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that viewpoint. So you said you're in a holding pattern with your birth mom, your first mom. I don't know what you call her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you talk a little bit about that? Have you seen her multiple times, and are you in this holding pattern? Is it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So after that first trip to Korea, I
Hmm.
saw her. Um, 2 times. And then since then, I've reached out directly to my uncle, but no
Mhm.
response. And then directly to the adoption agency. And because of all of the bureaucracy and red tape, I had to
Mhm.
sign a bunch of forms, and then they had to do some things. And finally, I
Interesting.
heard back that she wasn't in a place to meet with me right now because of the the knowledge in her family, her current family, the people that don't know about me, and I can understand that.
Mhm.
So, and then last year when we were in Busan, I had asked again and said I was going to be in the area if she's available to meet. I'd love for her to meet me again and my family or her grandchildren, and no response. So
Okay.
at this point, I kind of take the no response as I'm not ready yet or I can't yet for
Yeah.
whatever reason. And I know other adoptees might take that different ways,
Mhm.
rightfully so. And there's 1,000 different ways you can
Yeah.
interpret that. So I call it the holding pattern, meaning if her answer ever changes, my answer right now is the same. Let's meet.
Yeah.
I'd be thrilled to meet again and feel fan that flame of our connection.
I love that. And somebody referred to that concept as leaving the porch light on. Um, Even in open adoptions, when you have a relationship with the birth mom, I'm going to use that term for the for
Mm-hmm.
this podcast, and then maybe she disappears or goes away, or you lose contact for whatever reason, and maybe it's because emotionally she's just not in a space that she can handle that, or whatever the reason is. But if you leave that porch light on or leave the door open and let her know that you are always there to welcome her when she is ready to come back through that door. And I think that's that same concept. And hopefully she will when she's ready. But I love also that you're able to hold that space and not make it about you.
I was thinking as you were talking about that, there is a natural human urge to take that personally because this
Yeah.
is a personal relationship of
Yes.
a parent and a child. And at the same time, um, not making it about me. For me, if my sort of default relational pattern is to lean in with curiosity, I
Mm.
wonder what's coming up for her this season. There must be something that kind of keeps her in that particular place, and I want to hold space for that. But this is not to say that that's like the superior view. And you know, when I counsel adoptees, it's like, of course, that's frustrating and sad and hard and disappointing that your mother or that your caregiver or that your family member, the person who delivered you into the world, can't see you right now, doesn't want to see you, and just sitting in that, right? So absolutely holding space for the spectrum of responses.
Yeah, I mean, from your letter to this conversation, it is such, I mean, both and is screaming right now, right? With everything in adoption.
Yeah.
Um, I'll be looking back, fighting for why, you know, where you are and loving you from afar, and yet loving the parents that are holding me in their arms and taking care of me. It's that
Mm-hmm.
there's so much both and. I know a huge part of your advocacy work is around adoption literacy. Um, can you explain that what that means to you and why you think it's so important today? Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Shopping for the right hair and skincare products can be tough, especially for multicultural or transracial families. That's exactly why Kate Shanahan created Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. When Kate and her husband adopted their daughter, she realized that caring for her melanin rich skin and beautiful curls was essential to raising a confident girl. And as a cancer survivor herself, chemical free ingredients were a must. She wanted one place with safe, natural products for her whole family, plus education and resources for families like hers. Now you can find it all at Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. Just visit sweetpeachtree.com. And because you're a listener of the Adoption Roadmap podcast, if you use code ROADMAP10, you'll get 10% off your first order. Sweetpeachtree.com with the code ROADMAP10 for 10% off your first order. Sweet Peachtree, celebrating every curl, every shade, every family. I know a huge part of your advocacy work is around adoption literacy. Can you explain that what that means to you and why you think it's so important today?
I see it in a similar way to emotional literacy or financial literacy. But adoption literacy, for me, it's a framework. It's really like a convergence, a culmination of the work that I've been doing for the past decade plus,
Mm-hmm.
the research, my interactions, interviews with adoptees from all over the world. And it's a framework to help shield the community from misinformation about adoption, false portrayals of adoption, and to strengthen, empower, equip, and uplift adoptees wherever they are in the world and wherever they are in their journeys. And that can be a multidisciplinary approach. For me, I'm using my mental health expertise as a therapist, as a counselor, and providing the the space for adoptees to unpack everything, just a lot of the themes that you've given me space, to unpack here, Becca. But that's for me, my entry point into it. And I I chose the term literacy because when we think about just literacy in general, language literacy, that starts immediately, even in utero,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that we teach language, the alphabet, and conversation, how there's receptive language before I'm even verbal. But then when I do become verbal, if that's a profile for me, then I learn how to speak. I learn how to express what? My thoughts, my feelings, my decision making process to other people. So there's a literacy that can be applied to relinquishment, adoptee, adoption related themes and layers and experiences. And that's where we get the four core relational cues. And I use the word cue because when we think about attachment, is really, I mean, the boiled down idea of attachment is a child's putting out a bid for connection, a cue for connection, either a cry, a whimper, a reaching
Mm-hmm.
out, and then a caregiver monitoring the child and responding to that child with warmth, compassion, bigger, wiser, stronger, kind, right? So that's a cue. So a relational cue, the four core relational cues of adoption literacy is how do we as a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a nation, as a, a system of institutions engage and increase adoption literacy through those four core relational cues is humanizing adoptee narratives, right? Owning our parts in the story. And that's where we talk about there can be relational micro to macro um, like roles that we can play, but also understanding the institutional systemic layers, but owning our part in the story, promoting lifelong adoptee specific resources. And that can include resources that support identity development, the visceral sort of like trauma informed healing processes, education, legal, all of those things. And then elevating adoptees into positions of influence so that we can have adoptees teaching about adoption, sharing about adoption, um, being curious and discovering and distributing information about adoption that adoptees can take that leadership and they can be cultivating skills and we can be given these sort of like opportunities in even being funded to do that. And like I mentioned in the recent publication, it's not that we can't learn from adoptive parents or, white researchers. We're saying we can invite more adoptees into that process, though, to take those leadership roles rather than being um, perpetual children, infantilized, right? They were adopted, recipients of charity. That's really all they have to offer. Only observed, never the observer, as they say. So those four core relational cues, I believe the more that we can put those into practice and apply those, individually and as a community,
Mhm.
that there would be more innovative structures developed to keep families intact in the first place, but also post placement resources
Yeah.
for foster youth, former foster youth, adoptees of all ages and stages, and especially into adulthood that we have little research and data collection on, to support the idea that no one should have to be going through this alone. Right.
Yeah.
I think about some of the campers that I've talked to, they're going back to their families in the towns, and this is why they can't wait all year long for this 1 week at summer camp, because this is the only place where someone gets it. I'm like, dude, that shouldn't be the case. We got to change that. And I think adoption literacy is one of the pathways.
Yeah. It should almost be part of your parting gift once the adoption process, the process, the part of the process, the part of the journey where you are adopting the baby and then going home with the baby to be a parent now through adoption and navigating the relationship with the birth family and with how to be a good parent for an adoptee, and then the adoptee growing up. It should be here is a packet now of resources in your area. I know that, there are resources in every state, or even maybe from your agency, that either one, people are not taking advantage of, but they know about because they don't think it pertains to them, which always makes me so excited to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that facetiously. um, or two, you have to know you need it and then go down this rabbit hole to find it. And it's not always easy, but in most cases, it is there, oftentimes even free for you to take advantage of. It's just so difficult to find and get your fingers on. So I wish it was part of the process as a, now that you have gotten through this part of your journey, it becomes about something different. And here are the resources to guide you
Yes.
through the next part of your journey.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about access and availability and even
Yes.
awareness that
Yeah.
it exists and it's relevant to our family. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that second part is even more important, that it's relevant to your family. I think so many people think, well, we're not a transracial family, so we're good. And I adopted at birth. So, if we have issues down the road, maybe we'll tackle it then. And we at RG Adoption Consulting, which is the company I run that helps to guide hopeful parents through the first part of their journey, at least, we are always trying to tell people from the get-go. In fact, I know you came into our community once to talk because it's very important for us to introduce our community to adoption competent therapists as they're going through the process, because it's never a matter of if, it's a matter of when you are going to need that resource. And why don't you start
Right.
early?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's where the language of adoption literacy, for some folks, I hope, can help soften some of those barriers, if there's barriers there, because it's not like we're trying to take away anything from these families
mhm.
or accuse them of being bad. It's the notion that, like with language and finances, you're going to need this in your lived experience at some point. Here's some really helpful tools that will be useful to you, and we're here to cheer for you and support you as you engage with those tools. So we're not taking anything away. We're not blaming or shaming anyone. We're giving folks tools. I love that word build, that to build language,
Mhm.
fluency, proficiency, or to build wealth, um, but to build connection and empowerment and healing and support and strengthening in your family's lives, right? We're here to help you build the thing that you said that you're passionate about building when you sign those
Right.
adoption papers, when you're applying
Right.
for the adoption process.
Right. Right. Yeah. You said you were passionate about it. It doesn't end at a certain point. You have to take that passion and continue it. I know you talk a lot about this in your TEDx talk. that you recently did, and we'll link that in the show notes. I encourage anyone to go listen to it. It's really great, and it's not so long. I think it's like 15 minutes or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not hugely long. So go listen to that. And you talked a little bit about why you became a counselor in this space. Did counseling or therapy play a role for you growing up?
It did very briefly, but only as a punitive response to me getting in trouble. And that's where I think, so back then, 80s, 90s, mental health support, and it just in my worldview was, if you get in trouble, you're going to go see the guidance counselor or the principal or the counselor or whatever. And it has nothing to do with your personal growth or health. The same way we take a child to a well child checkup at, different stages in their life. Um, so I had a very distorted view of what counseling was. So I would stay away from it and even kind of look down on it. That's for people who've got some really bad problems. And
I
then,
grew up also in the 80s, and I remember one time, and I was not the best teenager. And I remember one time my parents saying to me, I think we should go to therapy. I'm like, I am not going to therapy. I that is not for me. I do not need that. And now I'm like, bring it. Somebody pay for my therapy,
yes,
please. I
yes.
mean, that was just not a thing. You're right. It had a lot of stigma to it. And I'm so glad we've come so far in the world from
And I,
that.
and I wonder where that stigma came from. Like,
Yeah.
why was that so ingrained in us back then? That's,
God,
yeah,
yeah.
that that's out there. But it took, for me, um, I mean, this is, I'm in my, like, going through the 20s and meeting people who had different worldviews, and then somehow mental health is becoming more normalized. And so looking back, it's something that I wish I could have had support for. But yeah, I mean, just even in you and I naming the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist is like, I don't know exactly how they would have gotten my buy-in, or how your parents could have gotten your buy-in to change your mind or convince you. But if that would have happened, I think I would have had someone like that trusted therapeutic alliance, building rapport, just even being able to have language around feelings and emotions, and even
Yeah.
maybe there's some gender piece in there. Like, I'm a dude, and I got to just, like, play things off, or I can be angry. Maybe that's kind of acceptable for male. And back then, and I think that you made a
The
joke about
suck
Rage
it
Against
up
the
mode.
Machine. I really resonated with this sort of, like, heavy screaming lyrics that are challenging authority.
Mm.
um and it's funny because I just got my, like, this over the past year, I've been digging out my electric guitar stuff, and that's been part of
Ooh,
my self-care routine. But
love that.
yeah, so back then that was kind of like my therapy, with listening to these songwriters name some of the, themes I was going through. But yeah, therapy back then, it really wasn't a place for me. But I'm so glad that um I was introduced to it, and that I was able to take a different perspective and really press into that later on in life.
Yeah. So you did start seeing a therapist later on in life,
Yes, I've engaged in
and
my own therapy. Absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, as a counselor, especially during my graduate training, seeing, like, the benefit of that, and then
yeah,
also being challenged to do that work before expecting my clients to do that kind of work. Why would I ask someone to go to these kind of places that I'd never have explored myself?
yeah.
And I think that's part of our role as counselors, as professional counselors, be able to have that sort of internal awareness before we walk alongside others and meet them where they're at.
I love that. Like, adoption is rooted in such complex emotions and themes around adoption, right? And we talked about some of those, like belonging. That's a pretty huge one. What are some of the other core themes of adoption? Um, and how they impact adoptees specifically through their lives.
The biggest ones that I've come across personally in my life, so I'll say personally, professionally, but personally, grief, identity,
Mm-hmm.
education about trauma and what it does in the body and what recovery looks like, and then community connections. So I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, those are the big pieces that I've had to work through. And professionally, we can think about the 7 core layers of adoption, because we can also add in guilt,
Mm-hmm.
shame, autonomy, choice, locus of control, personal responsibility. When these big decisions have been made for us without our consent or participation, it sort of disrupts the cause and effect, the development of cause and effect for an individual. That these big decisions have been made without me, being involved. What use is it for me to make any other kinds of decisions in my life? And I want to be careful not to like pathologize adoptees and just say like all of us have this sort of like emotional baggage. But I think autonomy and being able to reclaim control, that I have an active participation in the way that my life unfolds. Because sometimes we can get into, we're tempted to think that life is just happening to me and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a byproduct of my circumstances. And if only these other people and things would change, then my life would be better. We're acknowledging there are things outside of our control, absolutely. But I think one of the core themes that I've worked through myself and with others in my practice is regaining that revelation that we do have agency to make significant differences in the quality of our lives. And that can be through small incremental choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. It can look like larger sort of commitments and convictions that we can sort of like invest and pour our time and heart into. But it's really restoring that locus of control in a balanced, realistic way so that people can feel empowered to
Mm-hmm.
live the lives that they want to live.
Do you think there's, when people first come to you, and do you mostly work with adoptees, or do you, and around adoption issues, or do you work with anybody else in the triad? Do you work in other areas?
Yep. Predominantly, I primarily work with adult adoptees
Okay.
and teen adoptees.
Mm-hmm.
And I also work with adoptive parents, providing parent guidance. That's either through one on one coaching or through group support. I also host group support for teen adoptees and adult adoptees. And then I
Oh,
also
great.
provide organizational trainings for agencies, child welfare service organizations. And I think another piece is the family counseling situation, where I'm working with the adoptive parent or parents and the child in the meeting. So it's kind of like family therapy. Um, and that is helpful because it's like, don't just expect to send your teen to me, talk to me once a week, and things are going to like Harry Potter wand magically be better or something like that. Because sometimes that sends the message, the adoptee is the problem.
What
And
you
we,
what you
there's no,
recently just said, yeah.
yeah, nothing in the
Yeah.
environment has to change. So the
Right.
family context really
Mm-hmm.
helps us unearth some of these messages and some of these questions and needs, and then helps them collaborate, helps us all problem solve and work together towards solutions, toward
Yeah.
tangible, practical changes that are appropriate for everyone involved, and everyone gets to voice that.
That's great. And I want to talk a little bit more about adoptive parents in 1 second, but when when people first come to you, do you see a common theme or a common issue that they are coming to you for? It may evolve, but do you see that most people come to me for this and then it evolves from there?
Right. So two ideas come to my mind as you're talking me through that, Becca. The first one is the concern that may have brought you to a counseling space.
Yeah,
That can be an entry point. And then
right.
I think you're referring to the idea that as you start dialoguing with another trusted person, there you start to like reveal, or other pieces of your story start to become revealed, and you make wonders about them. And there's more self-discovery. There are more decision points, more pain points, more personal revelations. So I see that generally the initial presenting concern can be a doorway to unlocking um, more personal discoveries that can lead to increased interpersonal flexibilities, emotion regulation, um, more options for how to respond to stressors in life, all of that. So there's that first one. The second one would be, well, then what are some of those presenting concerns that typically bring people into a counseling, a formal counseling
Mm-hmm.
space? I'm thinking about the adoptee consciousness model, and I'll send that to you. But they talk about 5 touch points of adoptee consciousness. Status quo is, adoption is beautiful. That's all good. Rupture is maybe I've encountered some new or disturbing information about adoption, and I'm really reducing these down. So
Yeah.
please read the article. But I'm still sort of tied or loyal to the idea that adoption is good. And then the third one is dissonance, and that's where, wow, actually, I'm starting to hold that both and I'm starting to
Mm-hmm.
actually give some more intelligent thought to what if there is some grief that I could work through?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if there's some advocacy involved? Just all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And then expansiveness is learning how to sit with the handfuls of emotional experiences and meeting other adoptees, engaging other information. And then the fifth one is forgiveness and activism. Understanding that when we know better, we do better, not necessarily blaming or faulting people earlier on in our lives. Still acknowledging harms done and seeking reconciliation when we can, but seeking to be part of the larger change. So forgiveness and activism. I think in the dissonance or expansiveness phase is when an adoptee might reach out and say, we'll have some categories like relationship themes related to relationships in our lives, and that could
Mm-hmm.
be with friendships, colleagues at work, intimate partners, birth family, adoptive family, so relationship struggles, relationship goals. There can be maybe a death, maybe an ending or a beginning that has happened, and it's just a major life event, and I need to process some of what's coming up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I am going to do a birth family search, a reunion. I don't even know where to start, but I want to make sure that I've got, some support lined up. Or
Yeah.
maybe I just got back from a reunion trip. I thought it was all great, but it's hard to function. So I think about
Mm-hmm.
impairment in functioning, and I use that term really loosely. It's subjective, and that's how the DSM sort of defines a disorder. But um, the I guess 2 subsections of the second part is if someone feels as if my daily functioning is impaired because of XYZ, I think I need to go talk to someone
Yeah.
and see what's up, and that's a healthy thing. Um, but there's also preventative slash maintenance type of work, meaning maybe there isn't necessarily this big thing happening in my life that's disturbing me, but I've got some layers of my story that I would like to work through with someone who is an expert, with someone who has lived experience.
Yeah.
And let's get some sessions on the calendar to do that as a sort of like preventative or kind of like a coaching type context. So that's primarily what brings folks to my space. In addition to, hey, we've got several family members and like, adoptive parents and adoptees, and we just want a third person involved to help facilitate
Mm.
some reciprocal conversation. And maybe that has something to do with, hey, my parents don't get it, or there's been some really heavy disagreement. We're approaching estrangement, and we agreed to do some counseling before we terminate relationship. So lots of different ways that people can find
Yeah.
themselves in a counseling context. And um, yeah,
Well,
I
I
hope
love
that we
those
continue
examples.
making opportunities for support.
I love those examples because oftentimes families are like, well, what do I need therapy for? What does my kid need therapy for? And so giving them some examples, some people might be listening going, oh yeah, that happened. And I didn't even think about, ways to process that. Um,
Yeah.
so I've heard you say that adoptees often lack the language or the permission to explore and legitimize their conflicting emotions about adoption. Given that, how can adoptive parents and society at large help create a safe space for adoptees to do just that, to process and express these feelings?
So I do a lot of parent coaching. So that's another piece. And I want to hone in on that because
Okay.
um, I don't know about you, Becca, but when I grew up in the 80s, I can imagine like my parents were parented a certain way. And I
Mm.
think they used part of that template to parent me. And that included, well, I can say it didn't necessarily include the sort of like sturdy, Dr. Becky Good Inside type gentle parenting. And I know she's not gentle parenting, but it didn't necessarily include, wow, you've got some big feelings right now. Can I give you a hug? Or, that wasn't their template. And
Mhm.
again, no fault to them, but it's, how dare you talk to me like that? As long as you
Mm.
live under this roof, our house, our rules. And again, I'm not like quoting them, but that's
It
like a
worked.
vibe, right? There's fear and punishment. So when I
Mm.
work with parents, I think hopeful or pre-adoptive parents, adoptive parents, get some parenting guidance, even if it just means like reviewing with yourself or with your partner, what are your parenting goals and strategies and perspectives? Because first of all, if it's two caregivers, how do you all get in on a coalition? But however it is, how do you interrogate and review your parenting template so that you can provide what an adoptee needs? And so we can ask this question: do adoptees and biological children, could we parent them the same? Well, listeners can kind of think about that themselves. What I'm saying is that the parent guidance idea is, um, we're asking, how do you make space for children, and even in your own mind, to ask, to be curious about, I wonder if what I'm seeing right now with this behavior, this interaction, this interpersonal dynamic right now has anything to do with physiological responses to trauma, um, distorted or disrupted development of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, trauma, grief, loss, identity, shame, guilt. I wonder, all right, maybe it's not just about, I don't want to go to school today and I'm being a defiant, spoiled, ungrateful, entitled brat. Maybe there's more to this story. So, and again, I'm not throwing my parents under the bus, but
I'm like,
there's
you might be
this.
throwing me under the bus right now. I
And I
mean,
remember living
shit. I'm
in
like,
friends' houses
I
and
needed to
hearing their
see you.
parents too. But like, I got the wooden spoon, I got spanked, I
Oh.
got the leather belt. There was punishment: go to your room,
Mm-hmm.
or you're grounded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea that when we're teaching children how to make safe, thoughtful, calculated decisions in the moment when they're flooded, when their executive
Yeah.
functioning goes online, I'm not going
Yeah.
to remember, oh, shoot, I got the leather belt last time. Or maybe I will. But my behavior modification is out of fear of my caregiver, not trust that they would join me and coach me through, learn how to have these big feelings, or the punishment of like, go to your room. So I'm
Yeah.
learning that when I have big, complex feelings, I'm all alone. I'm isolated. You go away. Well,
I
that's quite a
realized
message.
that right away with my son. That did not work. In fact, I had to do just the opposite with him. If it would have just escalated every time I tried to put him into the room by himself. That was not, I realized, no, I actually have to bring him into me and hold him
Yes.
and sit with him until he can, like, that was the only way he was going to regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad actually that I had heard someone say that the whole go to your room or go into timeout might not work for children through adoption, or just some children can't
Right.
do that. That is not the best way. So I was very grateful to have heard other people say that too. So
Yeah.
yeah. You talk in your TEDx talk about why adoptees need a new kind of village. What is this new kind of village? What does that look like? And how can we build it?
That flows from this idea that it takes a village to relinquish a child, and perhaps another one to keep that child from talking about what happened. So I say a lot of people have to be in on it. So everyone in the
Mm-hmm.
family system, extended family, the neighbors, society, they have to have this idea that adoption is an ultimate good for a child. It's beautiful. We're rescuing children, altruism, benevolent. And a new kind of village says that if a child must experience the trauma of being separated from families, cultures, histories, languages, we can be the village to help them tell us what that was like.
Mm-hmm.
We can be the village to cultivate their skills to speak and learn and heal through that process, and even equip them to be leaders in individual and collective changes that we're all rooting for, to be building this sort of better world, making more space for the adoptive voice. And that's where, the village that is is pursuing adoption literacy, like that's sort of like the
Mm-hmm.
difference. So that's really what I'm aiming for, and I'm grateful for you giving me space here in our conversation to be able to work through that together. It's an ongoing conversation for sure.
Absolutely. And I've really noticed um, more and more of that conversation due to social media, which has been great because when I started working in this industry as an adoption consultant, I founded RG Adoption Consulting in 2013, and that was not happening. People barely had a website, let alone doing anything on social media. And since then, there's been a lot of loud voices around adoption, which I may or may not agree with all the time, but it's great because it gets people talking and it gets people thinking. And it's good that people agree and don't agree and
Mm-hmm.
can maybe look inward and understand why they agree or why they don't agree. And um, we don't all have to be on the same page, but we have to be thinking about these things critically. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I thank you for doing that work and for doing the TED Talk. You also wrote a book, The Adoptee's Journey, which focuses on empowering adoptees through understanding their own experiences. And I'm curious, what are some of the most empowering lessons or strategies that you've learned through your personal and professional work?
Strategies toward addressing loss, healing, and
Mhm.
empowerment, just in terms of the context of the book. For me, in the book, I wrote about um, the so understanding the history of adoption, that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Our lives don't happen in a vacuum, and to be able to have a comfort level in approaching and addressing layers of loss and grief,
Mhm.
having a developed understanding of our inner world, like the emotional world context in
Mm.
psychoeducation about how our brain and body work. Storytelling is a huge aspect of that, to be able to declare
Yeah.
our truths aloud and have them received by the communities around us. So important. And then there's this aspect of like deciding how you want to be present, how a person wants to and I'm getting this from a quote by Dr. Judith Herman, who does a lot of trauma and recovery research. She says something to the effect of, there is no way to compensate for an atrocity, but there could be a way to transcend it by making it a gift to others. And that's where she goes into this idea of survivor's mission. So I think a lot of adoptees that I see right now, when we're talking about this adoptee renaissance, is, hey, we've been through something pretty terrible when we think about the implications of trauma and loss. And yes, it's multi-layered. There are a lot of origin stories that lead to relinquishment, absolutely. And how can we all be part of that new village? And there's that survivor's mission. How do we use what we know to make it better for others, to make the path better for others, and create more spaces for critical dialogue and healing and personal growth, growth fostering relationships, heightened empathy, increased interpersonal flexibilities, increased options and choices when we have to deal with the stressors of life. I think the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of being that allows someone to cope with the stressors of life, um, realize their abilities and strengths, to learn well and work well and contribute to the community. And I think that's
Mm,
a very clear story arc where, yeah, we are people just trying to live good, meaningful, satisfying lives, but the world is messed up. Things can happen to prevent us from doing that. So mental health is trying to get to a place where we can acknowledge, yes, the world is messed up. We've got stressors outside of us and inside of us. How do we learn and work together the skills, utilize the strengths that we already have to work toward making things better, contributing to the communities around us locally and around the world? So the adoptees journey is really about, it's not necessarily going from one to the other as if we can fully heal on
yeah.
this side of the grave. It's about saying that we're widening the scope of what an adoptee is allowed to think, feel, say, and do in response to relinquishment, trauma, adoption, all of that. And we're widening that scope, and we're cultivating skills to be part of the transformation, the restoration, the the revelation and revolution process. And that's a large spectrum, and we're continuing to develop and discover that together. And the hope is that the outcome is a personal and mutual empowerment together, collaboration and diversity. Absolutely. We don't all agree that that's true. And how do we use that as one of our strengths in our shared humanity?
Mm. I love the words that you choose when you speak. It lands really powerfully. You have given us so many golden nuggets in our conversation today that I hope that our listeners will walk away with. How can people find you?
I'm on Instagram. The handle is at Therapy Redeemed. I'm on my website is therapyredeemed.wordpress.com, or you can just Google Therapy Redeemed and you'll find my website. LinkedIn, Camley Small, and then my email is therapyredeemed@gmail.com.
And we will put all of that down there for people to down there meaning on in the show notes for people to find.
Awesome. Yes.
Um, before we let you go, though, and when I say we, I mean me and all the thousands of listeners. I want to do a quick rapid fire round. And the first one is a shout out to one person or organization that has influenced your adoption journey or the work you're doing in adoption.
I want to shout out the BIPOC Adoptees docuseries community. And
Oh.
for listeners, I think when I am urging people to support and fund adoptee led organizations, and there's so many, but that's just the first one that comes to my mind right now. Check them out because they're providing conferences, they're providing events, they're providing stories online, they're providing coalitions virtually and in person, and that can be a doorway into so many other types of communities that serve the adoptee community. But that's for me, I've been really inspired and thankful for their presence in the community this season. So yeah.
What's one piece of advice you'd like to share with adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents?
Community community without information, it can be kind of aimless sometimes. Information without community can be kind of just cold and brainy headspace kind of stuff. So I think for adoptive parents, in community with other adoptive parents is going to be one of your best bets to get resources, like the hive, the tribe kind of thing.
Mm.
And be sure to prioritize adoptees, adult adoptee voices, um, critical adoption studies scholars, activists, not so that you can agree on everything, but so that you can be informed, so that you can have more choices about how to parent the child under your care, because they are counting on you to do that work. So therapeutically, that self-awareness, that self-reflection can be done individually. So getting that therapy, getting that counseling, but also getting that community experience together. It's going to be very important for you.
Oh, you're speaking my language. This is a similar question, but a little bit different. What's one thing you wish every adoptive parent knew before they brought their child home, or maybe when they were thinking about adoption?
I've said this a lot. I was a son before I was adopted.
Mhm.
My life didn't start with you. Dear adoptive parents,
Mm.
our lives didn't start with you.
Oof.
And adoption doesn't erase our culture, ethnic, racial identities.
Mm-hmm.
Your role is to help us learn how to live through that and carry those truths with us throughout our lives, with dignity, with empowerment, with resources and options. And I'm cheering for you in that process.
Hmm. Describe adoption in 3 words.
Let's work together.
Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all these golden nuggets. Adoption is not just a destination, it's a journey filled with love, resilience, and growth. Wherever you are on this roadmap, trust in your path, stay open to learning, and always lead with your heart. You already have everything you need to create a beautiful story for your family. And when the road takes unexpected detours, I'm here to help you navigate every turn along the adoption roadmap. Thank you, Cam.
Thanks so much
Bye-bye.
for having me, Becca.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.